found an apartment during that time in South Central, a tough part of town that later erupted into civil unrest in 1992. Police Chief Tim Connor said LA's uneasy racial history and the long-standing distrust of the police all worked in Lester's favor.
It was difficult to get people to want to talk. This is 1994 in the city of Los Angeles. We had just come off of some really significant unrest in the years prior. There were still some tensions in the community, and folks were nervous about cooperating.
If there's a common thread to the hunt for Lester, it's that most people around him were content letting his ugly past stay in the past. It's something we encountered again and again. You could sense this in Lester's old neighborhood. Across the street from his old apartment at a liquor store, I spoke to a man named Rodney. He's lived in this neighborhood for close to 50 years. I showed him Lester's photo. Have you seen this guy? This guy look familiar to you? Have you seen this guy? We talked, and Rodney told me he didn't recognize Lester. He agreed to hang on to the picture and call me if he heard more. And then he added something revealing about the area where Lester had chosen to hide, successfully, for probably close to 20 years. He said I should stop asking people if they had seen that man.
And to give you a little word of advice, don't go anywhere else out here looking for doing that.
No? Nobody wants to talk about that stuff?
Talk about that. I'm just being honest with you. You ain't gonna find nobody.
Perhaps understandably, the people in Lester's social circle from that time, those who are still alive, are equally guarded. One of them, Nevin Jones, tried to shoo me off his driveway when I went to see him at his house in Long Beach.
Sir, I'm going to say this once.
Sure.
Then I'm going to walk you to the curb and I'm going to ask you to leave.
Absolutely, sir. Another close friend of Lester's, a doo-wop singer named Pete Oden, has passed away, but his 2 adult children both told us they didn't want to dredge up the past. Here's one of them, Brian Oden.
I don't have time, really, and I really don't have any information or anything to say, That was a long time ago.
Police did begin to get a picture of Lester's free-spirited social circle, including several friends from Ohio who were trying to break through in the burgeoning music industry. They said Lester's family ties to the Motown singer Darryl Banks would have helped him move comfortably in these circles. One of the early tipsters told police that Lester, now going by the name Victor, even began hanging out with the durable Hall of Fame music group Earth, Wind and Fire, and with Maurice White, the band's legendary frontman. We were curious about this, but if members of the band knew something, they weren't talking either. Maurice died a few years ago. His brother Verdine wouldn't talk to us, his publicist saying simply he did not wish to participate in this story. We even tried to speak to Verdine directly before a recent concert in California. But his tour manager said he wouldn't come out and see us. He didn't need the distraction. Intriguing details about Lester's life in Los Angeles trickled into police over the next few years, but never quite enough of them. The best lead they had was Kay Banks, the woman Lester stayed with after his escape. Kay told police that by the time they came knocking at her door in 1994, Lester had already fled. She said he had become controlling, and eventually, she made up a story saying she'd received a call from the FBI, so he would leave. Chief Tim Connor always wondered if she was telling them everything she knew.
I think we got most of what she knew. I don't think we got all of what she knew.
He said he believes Kay remained in close contact with Lester's father, among others.
I think in the end, she was far more afraid of him than she was of us. And that if it had ever come to light that she had crossed him, although he may have been rolled back into custody and back in prison where he belongs.
Yeah.
His father was still alive at that time. You know, I don't want to speak ill of the guy, except that I think that he was very involved in Lester's ability to stay a fugitive, and I do firmly believe that had Kay crossed the family, that she rightfully feared the retribution that probably would have come her way.
Kay Banks passed away a few years ago. There are old photos of her posted on one of her children's social media accounts that show her from the time. Young, her hair done up, in sunglasses and a go-go dress, marveling at the LA palm trees. And there are more recent photos, in the years before she passed, with white hair, in a yellow cardigan sweater, and a grandchild on her lap. 40 years is a long time. The decades can also be measured by the thick layer of dust in Joy's attic back in New Mexico. A lifetime of relics are packed in boxes, hundreds of them, stretched across a space the size of an airport hangar. In the end, our hunt for the clipboards and folders with Vic Young's signature was a bit like the search for Lester himself. You know he's there, but until you look in the right spot, he remains just out of reach. Tim Connor has never quite gotten over it.
This guy has been so lucky the entire time. He has either been helped or propped up or provided for or covered for or just had blind luck for this whole time. It's unbelievable.
While most of the people who knew Lester as Victor Young have remained silent, the one who may have known Lester the best during this time was a man he treated like a son. When we come back, we join the U.S. Marshals as they try and find the man Lester raised as his own.
When the U.S. Marshals jump-started their hunt for Lester Eubanks 2 years ago, they focused a good portion of their effort in the last place they knew he'd been living, Los Angeles. And while Deputy U.S. Marshal David Seiler oversaw the manhunt from Ohio, he began speaking almost daily to a deputy in the Marshal's South LA office, Craig McCluskey. I met McCluskey at a coffee shop across the street from his office in the Santa Ana Federal Courthouse, and we sat outside on a patio.
Well, obviously this case has a lot of California ties, just because this is where he was known to have fled after he took off.
Yeah. As McCluskey interviewed the aging group of friends from Lester's social circle, he began to hear about an important figure in Lester's life in L.A., someone they didn't know a lot about. When Kay Banks had welcomed this fugitive into her home in the early 70s, she was not alone. She had a teenage son, Daryl Banks Jr. One woman told McCluskey that while Daryl was technically a cousin, he became like a son to Lester.
She described Lester as being very close to Daryl. I remember him kind of raising him as if he was his own.
The more interviews McCluskey did, the more important he felt Daryl was to locating Lester. He thought there was a chance they had remained in touch.
But was there a point where you think that Lester may have been sheltered by Daryl?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't prove that, but...
This is a hunter.
It's based on the handful of interviews we've done with everybody in that circle. It's not one person saying, yeah, Daryl and Lester were close. It's several people saying that. So based on that totality, I mean, you got all these close adopted aunts saying, yeah, Daryl and Lester. I mean, there has to be a tight bond there, and those bonds just don't go away.
Yeah, but
of course, McCluskey wanted very badly to talk with Daryl. At this point, Daryl was in his 50s and had been working for years as an architect in Asia. In the summer of 2017, though, he had temporarily returned to Los Angeles for a big new assignment. And it happened he had been staying in a house nearby.
And so when we first start, exploring the neighborhood where he lived, trying to, set up and do some surveillance, everything that, he would do, trying to track somebody down, we contacted a few neighbors. And all the neighbors, they had nice manicured yards, they had curtains on their windows. And then, then there's Daryl's house. There's foil on the window. The blinds were shut. Everything was locked down. You couldn't see, through an inch of window in the house. I mean, it was just buttoned up. And
he even wondered if it was possible Lester was there with Daryl.
So we were careful in our approach, because if Lester was in there, we weren't just going to, burn it to the ground and knock on the door and, get denied entry, and then, then boom, Lester's gone.
Right.
So we did a few days of surveillance, but it turned out that Daryl had already moved out at that point. He had already left and gone back to Vietnam. So we missed him by about a week, just like the.
After talking with McCluskey, I began my own effort to speak with Daryl. I found him on social media, and in April, we began messaging on WhatsApp. He was in Vietnam, designing elaborate public spaces for hotels and casinos. It took months to arrange for an interview, but eventually, Daryl agreed to one. We had a producer in Vietnam go to his house to help facilitate the call while I was back in the States. I spent a long time talking to him because I wanted to find out whether he could give us real insights into what Lester was like during that period. Maybe he could tell me something that would be the key to finding Lester. All right, are we ready to go? Daryl, you good? Can you hear me?
All good.
Great. So actually, maybe even before we start, tell me where you are. Where are we reaching you?
I'm actually in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, in District 2, a place called Thao Dinh.
I wanted to talk with Daryl about Lester, but I was also curious to get a sense of his own father, the Motown singer, who separated from his mom and then was shot and killed in 1970 when Daryl Jr. was just 10 years old. And you must be pretty proud of what he accomplished. He was, even still, has quite a strong following.
Oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. It's like, it's amazing. It's actually amazing.
Do you listen to his music?
Yeah, I have everything that he's ever done.
Kay packed up the Volkswagen and moved with her young son to California soon after her husband died. He was about 13 years old when a stranger arrived at the house.
He was big, man. That was the one thing that I always remembered. He was very big, bodybuilder type, but not overly excessive, but still. And he was very calm. The way that he came across to me and the way that he always dealt with me was in a very calm manner. Very controlled, very calm, very matter-of-fact, well-spoken, and yeah.
Was he a warm person?
I'm sure he had his abrupt or aggressive side, but with me, it was never like that.
Daryl told me he first learned Lester's real name and identity about 2 weeks after he arrived.
My mom introduced him as family, but didn't go into and elaborate. So then she told me what he had done, who he really was, that he was family.
And she told you what he had done, like for real what he had done, or a watered down version?
No, she told me exactly what he had done.